like that weather. So we will get started today. I'm going to turn on closed captions. Make sure that that makes things a little bit accessible for us. There they go. So today I'm talking about a subject that I've really gotten passionate about. When I first started working with assistive technology, I was all about the little kids and AAC, but my thoughts and my experiences kept expanding until I realized how much assistive technology can really help in terms of transition and in creating more possibilities for the students that we serve once they become adults, or as I like to say, they're going to be our neighbors someday. So we want to make sure that they have every opportunity possible within our communities. So today we're going to be talking about tools to increase that opportunity. As you can see in the bottom left, I have a link to the full presentation. That's what I dropped in the chat. So when you look in the chat, this will give you a copy of all of the slides here. The handout that I had sent out prior is just making sure that everyone has a way that they could take notes, write down something that really pops out to you. I also like when I'm watching presentations or attending them live to write down teachers' names, like, oh, I need to tell this person about this thing. So that's why I wanted to give you a little bit of a notes perspective as well. So let's advance the slide. Yes, there's my little introduction again. My email is in there if you do want to reach out and ask any questions. Today, I basically want to teach you a little bit about something called task demands and how those change within different vocational environments, how tools can help meet those demands, and then kind of creating a hierarchy of how to teach those tools to prepare adults for the day that the job coaches aren't going to be there or the teachers aren't going to be there. Talking about creating steps to help inform coworkers how to work with the AT user, and then discuss the importance of self-advocacy. And it starts out as a student on a job training site. Job training shouldn't just be about, here's how you're going to do this one job. It should be, how are you going to talk to your future employers as well? So no big task, right? We'll start with, what is assistive technology? And taking that into account in this context. So when talking about assistive technology, I know we always go back to the IDEA definition, which definitely fits post-secondary as well. And I like to focus on 3 words: increase, improve, maintain. We want to increase a student's function, improve their access, or maintain what they already have, especially for those students who might tire out over the long term. So when we're in those adult settings, it's much the same. When students go to a job site, they're not necessarily under our IDEA umbrella. That law protects them while they're in school. But once you head out into the work world, you're going into the Americans with Disabilities Act, being the main act, the main law that protects you and protects your rights and protects what can go on in that environment. So when you look at ADA, one of the key points of that law is that workplaces have to provide reasonable accommodation. Now, if I had to define reasonable, I think that's going to be a pretty tricky thing. I know the lawyers, when talking about assistive technology, always like to say it depends. And depending on the job and the site that you're in, reasonable could be a change as well. We do know that ADA says that buildings have to be compliant in terms of people getting in and out and some safety. But as far as what happens with your work tasks during the day, it's important to know what you are talking about so that employers can help you and make those accommodations and maybe even see that they are reasonable if it might not have seemed that way before. So when I think reasonable, and this is kind of my stared head definition, is that we want an accommodation that says, okay, we can work independently when we have a tool. That workplaces, those tools change the environment more so than changing the person. And I'd say this happens at a greater degree than it even does when we have a student in the classroom. And we can understand all of this through task demands, but I also want to mention that just like we might have an accommodation in an IEP, human resources within a job site can make some changes as well in terms of what you're wearing to work. If it's an environment where everyone's supposed to wear a button-down shirt and a tie, and that's just not going to work with the physical being of you, that's something that HR can make an accommodation for, sitting or standing, as well as scheduling flexibility. But again, it still falls into that category of reasonable. So human support is what students are used to until they reach this post-secondary environment. We definitely under IDEA really push towards students being as integrated as possible and as successful as possible. And sometimes that means giving them a lot more humans, giving them maybe a one-to-one aide or having an extra paraprofessional in the room. When we get to job sites, some students can still get coaching through voc rehab. Students have job coaches typically in transition, but there is a point where that fade, that support does start to fade. And that means that the student, when that support is faded, needs to still be able to accomplish their job without necessarily another person there. And this bottom part is probably the most tricky because we have job coaches who are on site and their purpose is to coach, but it's also difficult to kind of find the right times to jump in and help a student versus the right times to step back, and how to kind of wean away from jumping in and providing human assistance, because that can promote prompt dependency. We don't want a student to be sitting around waiting for someone to tell them to go, to tell them what's next. We want them to be trained in a way that they kind of know where to go next. I know my first day, oh man, I worked at a call center when I graduated from college because that's what one did with their bachelor's degree in 2004. And so I walked into this call center and I had no idea what to do. Like, my training had not told me, you know, this is what you do when you sit down at your desk in the morning. Like, I went through this whole training about how to use the computer, etc., but like, I didn't have a headset. Like, I just had this phone with buttons and no receiver. It was strange. And eventually, like, the manager came over and like started, you know, plugging things in for me and kind of grumbling, like, why don't you know what to do? And I thought, oh my gosh, I have my bachelor's degree and I just walked into my first job and I had no clue what to do. So we want to make sure that students receive the support so they can initiate and be ready for those situations. One important key to this is looking at the idea of task analysis versus task demand. Now, job coaches are probably very familiar with the idea of task analysis. A lot of special education teachers, when I bring this up, they say, oh yeah, making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like, yes, we need to break down to the smallest steps and all the materials needed. On the flip side, a task demand is what underlying skills are needed to do that task or job. While on the left, under task analysis, I might be talking about, you know, opening the bag of bread, pulling out a couple slices of bread. On the task demand side, I might be thinking, okay, so I have to know how to sequence. So I have to have some cognitive awareness of sequencing, of the number representation. I have to have the fine motor to be able to untwist the twist tie. I have to have the gross motor skills to be able to stand and reach the surface where I'm making my sandwich. And what lies in the middle there is the tools to do the task. Do I need a special knife? Do I need a jar opener so I can get that peanut butter open? Do I need some kind of height adjustable table so I can make my peanut butter and jelly sandwich? These two things overlap at the idea of what kind of tools we might need to adapt to that situation or environment. So I'm going to go through some of these areas and you will see these again. So you're going to see them twice. The first time that we see them, I just want to describe what each area is. When we think about task demands, these are the things that underlie multiple activities. If we think about communication, we communicate in many different settings. I might communicate with my friends just for fun. I might communicate in an emergency situation. I might communicate by writing. I might communicate by sending emojis. I mean, that's really kind of a fun thing to do. But when we think about communication, when we look at a task, we have to think about that expressive and receptive language, turn taking, if that's something that's involved, as well as can we write out and express what we need to in that situation. And comprehension also falls into this. Are we understanding the messages we're getting from people? Cognitive is the next thing that underlies most of these things. And this is where I was talking, we have to be able to sequence and put steps in order, but also memory and comprehension. I threw that, it kind of bridges a little bit between communication and cognition. Being able to analyze a situation or synthesize new information. We might not be using those words all the time when we're training somebody, but it is what we're thinking. We want them to be able to handle a situation that might not be the norm and still apply their job to it. And then I started executive functioning a little bit there because it does come up under a couple different task demands as well. So knowing that whatever task we're doing, there are some underlying cognitive skills that are required. Physical, fine motor and gross motor, they go into so many things that we do. Whether I am typing on my computer or I might be opening a little bag of chips for lunch, I definitely am using my fine motor skills. Gross motor, I can get myself around, well, right now my house instead of my office, and get up and down the stairs, I can carry things. And stamina, even though I might be a little done Zooming by the end of the day, this is GoToWebinaring, totally different. We have to make sure that throughout the day, a person doesn't fatigue and kind of lose their power. Sensory underlies a lot of tasks as well. We have to be able to see what we're doing, hear what's going on around us, and know where we are in space. In school, I know many times we think about sensory as, okay, we're getting a kick band, or we're going to get some fidgets for somebody. And I will say most adults in the office world do have fidgets. This looks like a lot of decoration on the desk, but adults love to fidget. But the concerns in a workplace usually are more easily addressed when they are something with vision and hearing. Affective. This one is always kind of fun too. How do you find a tool for affect? And I will say that this is where, when looking at jobs, we want to make sure it's something that a student has some interest or enjoyment in. That's why we have all those transition goals going through high school from age 14 and a half on. Like, what do you like? Do you like to be outdoors or indoors? Do you like to work with people or alone? Because once you get into the workplace, there's not really a lot to motivate you aside from walking out of the door with a paycheck at the end of the 2 weeks. Some workplaces are great at this. Some, you're just going to come in and do your job. Like when I was in the call center, I came in, I answered phones, I stopped answering phones, and I went home. As well as the social emotional skills that it takes to operate within a job setting. Attentional and bringing back around executive functioning, because in an office or in any type of work setting, whether it be a mechanic garage or a laundry service or retail, you have to be able to maintain your focus with everything going on around. Perhaps shift focus. If I'm folding things and a customer says, hey, I need to find jeans, and you're like, okay, I have to stop, tell you where the jeans are, and then come back to folding. Self-management, organization, impulse control is very important. Having worked the night shift at an IHOP in the middle of the University of Illinois campus, I will say that's very important as an employee. Knowing that, being able to have some items that can help you with memory in terms of short-term, long-term, and even immediate. So these functions as well underlie a lot of the things that we do. This hierarchy of functions and activities, I kind of like. It is related to school. However, I see that a lot of this does apply to work as well. I got this image and a few others from a website that one of my colleagues created, Daniel Cochran at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I really like the way that this visual breaks it down. We have students who are going towards these different career paths. And even though it might say independent and college and career on the other, when we're independently living, definitely there can be some career that comes into that as well. And look at all of these things that go into it. Like when we are considering what it takes to be at that independent living phase, it's not just about having your domestic things down and having your job down, but also rec, leisure, and community. Underneath that, to access all of those, you need a foundation of some reading, writing, and math, which means you might need tools to support in those areas. Underneath, you need to have some skills in terms of activities of daily living. You need to have your needs met in that area, as well as having some skills and needs met in terms of organization. And then underlying it all come most of these task demands. Seating and positioning. If you're not positioned well, you can't necessarily be able to access your reading or writing. If mobility is an issue, you might not be able to access the environment for your vocation. All of these can go up the pyramid for sure. So these foundational skills are really important when considering vocation. So I know I just talked a lot about some theory, but the reason I do this is I'm going to share some tools with you within the presentation, but I want to make sure that those of you listening can understand how to go out and find tools on your own in addition to what I'm showing you. Because assistive technology changes, a person might change, the environment might change. So I like kind of teaching in this way, because if you understand the task that you're accommodating and the reason that it's difficult, it makes it a little easier to find what tool that you will need for that. So I always like to kind of put in a couple of reminders here. Reading doesn't just happen in a book. Even thinking walking through Jewel the other day, if someone's stocking a shelf that's empty, just thinking about a little bit of PTSD to last March when all the cleaning supplies and toilet paper were gone. If someone's coming back to restock that shelf, they need to be able to read the labels to know where things go, or have memory to know what that shelf should look like when everything is back. We need to look at what area of difficulty specifically is stopping a student from accessing. If a student is stocking shelves, is it a fine motor issue? Is it a gross motor issue? Is it that there's too much background noise going on in the environment and they can't focus? We have to find what that specific difficult task is and what the task demands are behind it. So thinking about those foundational skills and foundational activities back here, that's what's going to help us match students to the tool. Yay, tools. So what we're going to do is go through and match tools to task demands. Tools don't have to be exact. I think this is one thing with assistive technology where people really go for the brand name because it's the thing we know. But sometimes it's useful to say, I need a tool that does X, Y, Z to support these skills. I need a tool that helps me maintain my posture while typing at a desk. And then it's kind of cool. There are some ways to work backwards from that to find what you need. These are some resources that I like to use. Even though some of these are school resources, I find that they can transition well into the workplace when you're looking at the foundational skills. The Georgia Project for Assistive Technology has some great resources where you can find types of tools. The ASNAT, which is also the WADI, has a full resource guide, 26 pages. If you want something impressive looking to put in your binder, that's a good one. Dan, I like to compliment him because I've learned so much from him. And then here at the bottom, and this is a great time of year for this, Closing the Gap always puts out a free issue, and it's a resource directory. It has over 1,500 different products in it. It's free, so even if you're not a Closing the Gap subscriber, not a survivor of Closing the Gap, it's a different thing, live conferences. But when we look at that resource directory, there's so many great ways to kind of see things broken down by task. It comes out every February and March. So the link on this will take you right to the freshest copy of that. And I like to include this when I think about assistive technology and looking at the task demands about what specifically is difficult and what are we going to accommodate or help the student with. We have to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture. If I just look at, okay, the student's like having some difficulty with impulse control when they first walk in during the day, if I'm job coaching and see that, I might only be looking at the front part of that day. I might not be looking at something that's going to happen a few steps later. We see all these, I'm guessing they're scientists because they're wearing the scientist lab coats. Depending on what part of the elephant they're looking at, or we could say what part of the day they're looking at, they all have different perceptions of what's going on. And of course, the elephant underneath, which would be our worker or young adult, doesn't look too pleased for people examining them from every single angle. So we'll start out with reading. When we think about work, what activities happen during the day that involve reading? I mean, it gave the example of we might be reading labels that are on a bar within a grocery store. Maybe if someone's in a stockroom, there might be things labeled there. If a student is working in a kitchen, there might be a list of what needs to happen that day. If a student's working in an office or a spreadsheet, they might have to read spreadsheets. They might have to read emails. So lots of different ways that reading can happen. So how can reading be affected by these task demands? Of course, communication, someone has to understand the language that they're seeing. Cognitively, they have to be able to maintain attention and hold it within that short-term or immediate memory. Physically, do they have to hold the book? Do they have to hold the list? Sensory, vision falls under sensory, so definitely that could have an effect on reading. Affective, do they understand why they're reading it? And attentional, if there's something going on, can they keep their attention on the reading? So I'm kind of narrating more through this first one. If you are taking notes, this is where those notes pages can be really useful if you're looking at a specific student. You can say, oh, okay, looking at all these functions here on the right side of the screen, here's how each of those might affect the student in this area. But of course, what would a discussion of tools be without some tools? So with reading, some of the most, I would say, common things that we see to work with this, and definitely would fall within the realm of reasonable to me, are screen readers, which will read pretty much everything on a screen. I was giving somebody kind of a differentiation between that and the text-to-speech program a couple days ago, because screen reader will tell you, okay, if I'm looking across the top of my Word document, file, home, edit, all of those buttons, insert, it would read all of those off to you because anything that's on the screen will be processed, interpreted, and read. And that can be really great, especially for people who have visual issues, but it can be helpful also for those who might have a reading disability. Text-to-speech is something that's going to highlight the text on the page. So a text-to-speech program is going to read all of my words here, but it's not necessarily going to bring up that I put these little 4-box star thingies next to them that I like. A third tool could be a scanning pen. If you are on the move, but you need to be able to read things in the environment, it's very portable. They're not very big, and they're pretty efficient. You can store text on them. You can just pop in a nice little pair of earbuds and be able to hear what's coming out of that. And I will go a little bit deeper into vision and blindness when we're talking about the sensory. But overall, these are the 3 types of tools that you'll see mostly accommodating for reading. Some of the places you can look to find these. All major computer companies are kind of in, it's like a space race, except it's an assistive technology accommodation race where they try to provide built-in accessibility. It's kind of to the detriment of some of the programs that are established out there, but at the same time, it makes it so much more universal and makes the world more accessible. So each of these links will take you to the accessibility site for these big 3 companies, and you can see the tools that they have built in. There are also some specialized softwares. Read and Write is something that's only $145 for an individual license. And I say only because we're going to talk about some really expensive stuff later. But it's something that if an employer were to purchase that, it's not going to completely smash the bank. If an individual wanted to purchase that for themselves, it's not something that's going to be It's not a car payment every month. Snap and Read is another option. It has different features than Read and Write. They both kind of have small things that, depending on the task demands, might fit one student better than another. And that runs about $3.99 a month. You can buy a permanent license as well. And then there's also Bookshare, which is free, though it would be obtained by the worker versus the employer. This is something you might more commonly see in academic settings, though it's something to know about if there is something that an employee needs to read to keep up with work. And then again, that C-Pen reader, it's really nice. It's kind of like if you took like the handle off my hairbrush, that's about the size of it. And it's really easy to use to scan. And even though there are different versions of these, this one runs about $150. I've seen them as cheap as $50, but I really like the text recognition on this one. And I've also found that it does like a British accent, and that just calms me down. So I'm partial to that. So we move on to the next task. We've looked at some tools for reading. So moving on to writing. What activities happen during the day or in the student's job site or adult's job where they need to write? We might be writing emails. We might be writing memos. We might be writing schedule requests. We might be writing that we need a day off because of a vacation. We might be writing, asking if we can get our locker changed. There are many things during the day where you might have to write for a multitude of different jobs. You might be asked to write down what you need for an order. So how can that be affected by our task demands? Communication, we have to know the words we want to write. Cognitive, we have to be able to organize our thoughts to get them down. Physical, holding that pencil, being able to take the letter to wherever it needs to go. Sensory, being able to see it visually. Affective, we have to have motivation to do it. And attentional, we have to be able to kind of stay on task until the task is complete. And we might think, okay, writing, but when we put all of these underlying things on it, like, wow, how do we get anything done during our workday? To me, writing is something that a lot of times we overlook how much we need to do it in different situations. I know a lot of times we talk to students about name stamps because we want them to be able to sign their name on something, and that's very important. But what other things does the student need to write or work on once they get out into job world? And for someone who is in that vocational setting already, what are the times that you need to write during the day? And what can impact that? Put down some lists here. What you want to look for when you're looking for writing tools: word prediction programs. If you have someone who either has difficulty with the spelling or may have difficulty with the words that they need, that's a great place to start, because a lot of these word prediction programs, I'm going to jump over to the right here, such as Co-Writer, can take phonetic spelling. Like instead of writing phone, PH, I can start with an F, and Co-Writer knows kind of what direction I'm going in. Spelling and grammar check has become pretty universal at this point. Some people do need something a little more specialized. Keyboards and mouses. Actually, this is really funny, kind of like some nerd vocab here. One of my friends who was a programmer made sure to point out to me one night at a local pub that the plural of computer mouse is computer mouses. So just, you've learned something new today. So those specialized keyboards and mouses, there are tools that can help with vision, that can help with fine motor, that can help with that access. And then speech to text and its accessories. Using speech to text means you might need that headset. And this is another place where the environment might play in, because if I'm talking out loud in my office, which I sometimes do without really thinking, it's going to bother my coworkers a little bit, or they might be on the phone with somebody and they're saying, what is that lady talking about back there? But we might need some privacy in terms of using those writing tools. So these underlined phrases are also sometimes what I will type into Google, literally, if I am looking for a tool. specialized keyboards or mouses. If you click on the link on the right where I talk about adapted keyboards and adapted mouses, it actually goes to a saved Google search for adapted keyboards and adapted mouses. And I do it in image mode because then I can kind of get a look and say, okay, I'm looking for something with large keys. I'm looking for something that can fit on a small desk. And by getting that visual, it gives me a great start of what's going to help with that underlying task demand. So as I said before, CoWriter runs about $3.99 a month. Native tools with spell check. Grammarly goes a little bit deeper. Those adapted keyboards, you can find pretty much everything. Some of my favorite ones to look at, but I would have no idea how to set this up for somebody. I would have to go to Infinitec and find some kind of course or something on how to use them. They have one-handed keyboards, and they kind of look like somebody took a playground basketball and collapsed part of it in and put keys all over it. There are people that really helps them gain access to the environment. I mean, if you can imagine it, someone's probably made it. Same thing with adapted mouses. You can make it where the roller ball is really big. You can make it where the keys are really big. You can make it where it takes gross motor movement instead of fine motor movement. And then Dragon, which for assistive technology people, I kind of make the joke that it's the Dragon, but Dragon, naturally speaking, is probably one of the older speech to text programs, meaning you can dictate and it will put out your text. It's probably one of the oldest. It also has a little bit of a high price point depending on what you need from it. But it also is great for adults who might have dysarthria, somebody who's not necessarily articulating in a way that's understandable by everybody at all times. So it can be extremely necessary for certain people. It does take time to train. It does take time to make it work. Here in the prices, you can get it from $200 for kind of the basic Dragon, all the way up to, there is a $1,500 version. It's a lifetime license and includes technical support and Dragon for medical. There's also Dragon for legal because, you know, people who might not be able to write with their hands still have great thoughts. I like to think Stephen Hawking, you know, I looked it up. He had like a lab full of people there to transcribe things for him. But in the case that he needed even more AT, something like Dragon would have been able to suffice. And again, you can find writing tools underneath those different accessibilities. Math. As much as we joke about when am I going to use this math again, we do use math pretty much every day. Your boss tells you to go get 5 of something, regardless of your work setting. That, in a way, is math. We have to think, how is the math that we have to do in our job affected by the different task demands? Do we understand the word names for numbers? Can we understand operations or a word problem? Cognitively, are we processing it? Are we holding it in our memory? Physically, can we write down our answers? Sensory, can we see it? Affective, do we want to do the math? If it's part of our job, we should probably do the math, as well as attentional. And then thinking about tools that can match with that. It's not a ton, but usually, like if somebody was in a desk situation or working in a retail situation, a calculator can be very helpful. There are so many different types of calculators. I have fond memories of running out all of the paper on my dad's secretary's calculator that would let you type in and then it would print out the little sheets. She was very nice about it though. There's also specialized software for people who might have more intensive math needs, and then accommodations within tools. So calculators, prices vary. There are so many options. You can get digital ones through a website called Desmos, has everything from your basic calculator for function all the way up to scientific and graphing calculators. Equatio allows you to type in math problems. And then these two I have here at the bottom. Mathematica can be used with a lot of visualization software. And AutoCAD is something that's very industry specific. My husband uses it all day, every day. He also does some 3D imaging with Revit. And even AutoCAD and Revit have built-in accessibility features, because if there was somebody working in his office who needed help with vision or being able to use shortcuts to access the program, it's built in, because that's one of the things ADA does for us. Our programs have to be accessible. Rec leisure, going out on a limb here, it is something that's important to everyone's life. I think we know how a lot of these things can fit in. Rec leisure definitely involves a lot of communication, sometimes some planning, physical, depending on the activity, being able to kind of exist in that space, hearing and vision wise, affective, it should be something really fun and intentional. Just being able to focus on the group and the task at hand. So you might be thinking, why did she throw in rec and leisure when we're talking about work? Because I've had a lot of really strange jobs, because when you need to pay the bills, you take whatever job you can get. So even when I worked at Jewel, I was in the deli, I was slicing meats and cheeses. I put on so much weight because meat and cheese are delicious. But even when I worked there were coworkers who'd say, hey, do you want to get together after work? Hey, do you want to go do this? So rec and leisure, even though it isn't work, it's very important to work, to be able to feel like part of the community with your colleagues. And I know there are jobs where everybody just runs away and goes home. Like when I was done at the call center, I was out of there before the rubbing alcohol on my headset was dry. But we want to make sure that someone isn't left out just because they might have a disability or a difference. So I also like to think that, when we're at work, when I've had certain jobs, even the strangest job, when I was a waitress, they wanted us to do team building exercises. And I'm saying, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me, but we did it. So there are some things that might need to be taken into consideration. Don't rely completely on physical games if you're playing some team building things. If you are going out to do something, make sure that it's accessible. Like my husband's work picnic was at this great place, but it was at a pavilion that was in the middle of a field, which I can imagine somebody who might have mobility issues or some balance challenges would have had difficulty getting over to that pavilion. I kind of make this joke here. If you're going out to a bar at the end of the day, maybe don't pick the one that only has a single seater toilet in the back corner. Not every building is ADA accessible. And this is my note from me being a college kid at heart, especially the really fun ones. So we want to make sure that we are making things accessible in that recreation and leisure field, even though it's not necessarily something in the job description. And then when registering for conferences, if you have somebody that you work with who you are registering for a conference and they need accommodations, the best time to put that in is when you are registered. So it's something to take into account and make sure to plan ahead to help someone out. ADLs, another area that I know people might think, oh, this is going out on a limb. And I think at this point, we've gone through enough that okay, ADLs, I might need to communicate, say, hey, I've got to go to the bathroom, or, I might need to direct somebody in some help or some care. Cognitively, I have to be able to plan out when I'm going to do those things. Physically be able to access whether I'm getting my food out of the refrigerator or getting myself to the restroom. Sensory, I'd say you want to make sure you can see and be able to access your food. Affective, I find that when I need to go to the bathroom or eat, I'm very motivated. And intentional, being able to get through what your task is without getting distracted. There are ADLs at work. I know that, that coffee chat by the coffee maker, but regardless of what job you have, you're going to have some break time. So you might be having your lunch, you might be having a snack. You get to go to the bathroom wherever you work. That's pretty much we don't even need a law for that. You just need to. Except at the call center, we got 2 bathroom breaks a day. So I was just always very dehydrated. So when we look at those ADLs, we know that an individual coming in might provide any adapted utensils, plates, or cups. Because those things are so specific, and for certain individuals, it can be a matter of safety. That is something that usually would be provided by a person coming into a work setting. But the manager or someone at the workplace might need to set up an area. There are people who are very great at being able to eat their food, but they might not be able to get to the sink and rinse everything off. So there might be a human support or someone nice in the office who can do these things to help someone out. It is a lot of environmental change. I like to think down here, maybe reserved fridge space where someone can reach it. Having an accessible place to eat in the break room, or even additional equipment in the bathroom if necessary. Because even though ADA makes sure buildings are accessible, it's not always accessible to the complete extent that an individual might need. Communication, this is kind of fun because it's one of the underlying task demands, but it's also one of the things that happens a lot during the day. So we know communication, we have to obviously be able to communicate, cognitively plan out our communication, be able to interact, go back and forth, physically be able to talk or carry any equipment that might help us with that. Sensory, that hearing is very important to communication, as well as seeing, so you can read things that are written. The desire to communicate and being able to stay on topic, which sometimes I wish I had a little more AT for. So looking at tools that might help with that, there are specialized phones out there. If someone is deaf or hard of hearing, they can obtain a free phone through CapTel. There are relay services. There are many different ways to kind of help people out with that. I'll talk a little bit more about hearing under sensory as well. Portable voice amplifiers. This is something before I got into assistive technology. I wish I'd known this maybe a decade ago, because my mom was a teacher. All of her friends were teachers because that's how teachers do. And she had a friend who always was having voice problems. And so her solutions were to stay very hydrated. And then on the weekends, she wouldn't talk because she was starting to get some vocal damage from all the talking in her classroom. And just to think that maybe if she'd had a portable voice amplifier, that might have helped out a little bit more during the day. She wouldn't have had to put as much pressure to make herself louder. Just always makes me think, having FM situations, or not situations, I mean, you can have an FM situation, but having an FM system so that you are able to hear and understand things from around the room without not necessarily needing to be right next to somebody. Having a place to plug something in. If someone's using a communication device, they'll typically bring their own, but having a place to charge that or set it can be very important. And then I make a little note here as far as staff education. When communicating with AAC users, some people are great at it. Other people might need a little bit of direction, whether they want it or not. So I think that this is especially an area where advocating to HR can help with integrating into that work situation. Vision, hearing, and sensory, these things are on all the time, whether we want them to be or not. We hear things around us, we see things, but we need to make sure that we are focused so that we have the vision to be able to read things that are written down, be able to see hazards or safety problems that might be in our way, and be able to see if somebody's trying to get our attention. Same thing with hearing. You'll notice in most buildings that you go into that are public buildings, they have the fire alarms that don't just make noise, they also have the flashing lights, just to make sure that we're accommodating people who are hearing as well. So within these tasks and demands, there are a lot of really specialized things, and this is where we're talking money. Screen magnifiers, they're built into a lot of systems. When we start talking about Braille, there are now refreshable Braille screens, which are really cool. I put in a link here for the Chicago Lighthouse. They are a great source for going to get information about vision. But a refreshable Braille screen at this point in time will, on the low end, start you out at about $1,300. This next device under here, the UB Duo, is something I've seen around AT conferences for a while now. And what it basically is it's two computer keyboards that have a small screen, and you can type messages back and forth. And the reason I included this is because there have been a lot of police departments that have purchased these. There are some DMVs in different states that have purchased these because they might not necessarily always have a sign language interpreter on staff, but it allows them to communicate with someone who might be deaf and hard of hearing if they have the writing and typing skills to do that. They have the physical and the communication and cognitive skills underlying. Specialized speakers and headphones, even noise canceling headphones can help with this hearing and sensory. Having environmental accommodations, maybe not sitting in that corner where the sun comes in on one side in the morning and on the other side in the afternoon. Maybe screen protectors, dimmers, even special considerations such as specialized chairs. So there are a lot of these things here, like even ball chairs. I've seen those in offices where people just kind of have them because they like them, not necessarily because there is an underlying disability. ADA does give a lot of guidance in terms of accommodating this area, and it really kind of all kicked off with all phones from 1988 on should be compatible with hearing aids. So it's very interesting as far as how these accommodations have kind of blended into what we have. Seating and positioning, talking about the chairs again. Obviously, that's going to affect us physically, and that can affect so many other things. There's specialized chairs, height adjustable desks. I put in some examples of furniture. This is from, I think, the EnableMart catalog. It's a catalog where it's talking about everything from a height adjustable desk to maybe a height adjustable table that might be needed within the break room for somebody having lunch, for example. This is also where having some additional space around someone's desk so they can maneuver a wheelchair, or even changing around some of the furniture in the office to make sure that that space is accessible. Executive functioning and organization, so many skills underlie that, and I will kind of tie that up and bring in the example of my uncle as well. He is blind, legally blind, and so executive functioning and organization always comes up to me when I think about him, because this was back in the 80s, early 90s. People would clean his desk overnight, like the cleaning staff would come through and wipe things down, and they might move his stapler, which for most people, no big deal. But for him, it would be like, okay, where's my stapler? Kind of a little office space there. But if somebody could come in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to move these things back where I know he wants them, that can be really helpful. We have so many great things for this now, including timers. I highlighted one over here where you can run 4 timers either concurrently or they go one after the other. It's fantastic for setting up multiple tasks. So all of these things, this is just giving a quick reminder of what do we have to make sure we are able to do for workplace task demands. We know there are tons of VOC workplaces available. These are some that I know of, but truly the sky is the limit. If a student has the abilities and the skills to get into a field, we should be able to find something reasonable to accommodate them in that area and place. So the demands of your workplace do go way beyond the job description. No one says to me, hey, can you visually see this during a job interview? But they might say, can you lift something that's 50 pounds or heavier, which really kind of is a little subversive screening sometimes. But whatever job that you are thinking of now, these are like the village people of children's cartoons here. I have a 2-year-old who's getting me very into Paw Patrol. You have to ask yourself, what is the environment like? I put some key questions in here for this. To think, how do people do it standardly? How does the person interact with their environment, and who is it being done for? What tasks need to be accomplished? We're going back to that task analysis as well as task demand. Think about what strengths does the person have? Are they a really strong communicator, but their attention's not that great? Thinking about their weaknesses. And we have to understand, can a person learn to use a tool independently? Is it prompt dependence, or is it that someone's just not picking up that particular tool and we might want to start something different? Thinking about those task demands, I'm sure this visual on the right should be like burned into your vision at this point. That what are we seeing from what that person can do in terms of the task demands? So in terms of finding tools that match those demands, I love this because this is adjustable. It fits all sizes up to a 32-inch waist. Not my tool. Making sure that we do that matching. I gave you a lot of tools, but really you can find a tool for anything as long as you start with what the underlying task demands are. Think, what about the task is hard? That key of, is it communication? Is it physical? Is it the fine motor or gross motor? Once you figure that out, finding the tool is much easier. Making sure that we match the person to a tool that solves that specific problem. We also have to think when we're looking at tools, and this is actually a toy store near my house, which I love it because it looks like you can never escape this toy store. But when someone gets a tool for work, we have to realize who's paying for that tool. Is it something such as like a specialized cup or plate where the individual might be responsible? Or is it something that like a desk that the workplace might be responsible for? Who's providing it, setting it up, and planning for it? We just need to make sure that we can obtain the tool. There are some different programs. Every state has an assistive technology loan program. We need to create plans to make sure that everything is ready to go, and we need to make sure that it's effective at doing what it said it's going to do. And I know I love talking about this, and I will talk about it all day, but y'all are probably ready for 4:30. So I will say communication about AT is also important. You have to know your rights when you go into a workplace, because even if you do still have a vocational coach or a job coach around, eventually it's going to be you at making that advocacy. Like my uncle, he had a work buddy who was going to come around and make sure that everything was where it was supposed to be. Being very open with HR, having that communication, advocacy, and knowing what laws apply in what situations can be very valuable. Know when change is needed because environments change, jobs change. And I would always say to an individual, keep a binder with whatever service agencies you know, whatever providers you have, and whatever tools you know you are successful with. So, woohoo! Yay, I finished before 4:30. But if you want to chat, you can email me. Also, we just started a Twitter at my job, so you can always follow that too. We'll try to keep it fun. And just a quick plug, the Infinitec Practitioners Conference is coming up. There are tons of great sessions if you are able to attend and look at any of those. So, I'm going to go back to Sam. Anything as far as questions or?
We did have, I'm waiting to see if any other questions are coming in, but we had a few folks that were having difficulty accessing the full presentation link you shared. Would you be able to send me a PDF of the slides as well, Sayard?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll try dropping that link in again right now, but I will send that full PDF as well.
Excellent. That'll be great. And so the folks that asked, I will send that information in the follow-up